Now, unlike the Haverford strike, which had a quote, clear catalyst, which was Wendy's October 28th email, a stern reason for Bryn Mawr to strike isn't present. And unlike my documentary for Haverford, Bryn Mawr's strike doesn't have a primer or much of a prelude to dissect, since majority of its events rely solely on what happened at Haverford and what happened outside of Haverford that caused the stir of certain individuals take over Haverford in the first place. However, there are a few notable things to look over before the strike was initiated. Both President Wendy Raymond of Haverford and President Kimberly Cassidy of Bryn Mawr responded to the open letter to the BICO community on July 1st. She starts by stating her thanks for the BICO writers' work, apologizes for the harm from past and present, and acknowledges the need to recognize the racism in the structure of our institution and in individual behaviors. She honors the work put forth by this group while explaining the college's past initiatives and commits to continuously leading this work in the diversity leadership group. The rest of the document debriefs the demands made in the open letter, mostly aligning the same way Haverford did in their response. Between early July to late October, a few different outlets were created to foster conversation and try to begin towards what was requested in the BICO letter and what the school was already doing in regards to anti-racist work. 3 sessions were held titled Moving Forward Together, Open Forum on Equity and Anti-Racism. Session 1 was about connection, Session 2 about reflection, and Session 3 about action. In September, 2 events were held regarding community work in response to the first draft of the anti-racist framework that was mentioned previously in Cassie's response to the BICO letter. In these 2 events, double sessions were held for both student and then faculty and staff. The last revisions to this document are from early October, and notes the revisions and notes from the meetings from the former stated groups. Their mission statement reads as such. This framework, written by the grassroots group CARLA, the Campaign for Anti-Racist Literacy at BMC, is guided by imagining Bryn Mawr and the world in which it coexists as a place where all people thrive as their authentic intellectual, spiritual, and physical selves. In this envisioned space, everyone has a respected, supported, and creative role to play. And people, students and employees, beyond the hierarchical role of staff, faculty, and administration, who have been historically marginalized are centered. In this space, no one group or individual is the college. Each of us must take responsibility for being the college. We imagine creating a new culture in which we collectively agree on affirming inclusive ways of being, where humanity is prioritized and power is shared. Oppression happens variably across the world, and BMC community members come from many places with different histories of oppression and liberation, but we are situating this framework with references to anti-racist work in the context of Bryn Mawr College as a U.S.-based institution operating on the unceded ancestral land of the Lenni Lenape people. In the notes section of this working document, the BICO demands are both credited and shown how they correlate with the specific practices Carla has brainstormed to implement. It can be presumed that this would have been more solid come mid-December when the framework was promised to be originally delivered, a process which was disrupted by the writers and supporters who requested such a process. A day after the Walter Wallace killing, President Cassie sends out her response. Unlike with President Wendy's email, there wasn't any sentences or word choice deemed sinful, so no commotion came about. Cassidy then sends out a second response regarding both protesting and the strike that erupted at Haverford. Due to the interlocking nature of these 2 schools, some students at Bryn Mawr chose to strike in solidarity with Haverford before the coming Bryn Mawr strike was initiated. We support community members who are making the choice to stand in solidarity with Haverford students, and also respect that not all community members are able to make that choice. Faculty members and students will make the decision this week that are right for them, and we urge flexibility to allow community members to follow what they believe they need to do or offer. We encourage all to be generous and thoughtful and compassionate so that people are not penalized for their positions, but are supported for the choices they need to make. As a college, we have an obligation to offer the education we promised, and we acknowledge that supporting the needs of the community in this time of crisis is a vital part of this education. She goes on to mention that striking students can get up to 20 hours of lost work compensated and gives a few points regarding what's been going on with the Anti-Racism Action Plan, which includes funding for the Enoch Cook 31 Center, Africana Studies Development, Black History Month support, creation of an anti-racist committee, and funding for a STEM bridge program. Further communication about the Anti-Racism Action Plan is promised, and this letter is signed off by 3 main people we will encounter in the coming events: President Kimberly Cassidy, Provost Tim Hart, and Dean Jennifer Walters. On November 2nd, public letters regarding the proposed Bryn Mawr strike begin to circulate among students and faculty. Nothing is initiated. On November 3rd, 8:35 p.m., President Cassidy follows through on her promise of further communication and released the current draft for the anti-racism framework that was to be finished by the end of fall, at the request of the BICO letter. This also goes with her original promise of sending a mid-semester update on the framework and work done by Carla. Bryn Mawr's framework distills the information into 5 principles. Each principle contains initiatives, the actions for them, when they're due, and the resources regarding the initiative. Number 1. Name racism that exists structurally at Bryn Mawr. This includes 4 initiatives and 10 action steps. 2. Recognize racism as a central underlying condition / organizer in society and as the college that impedes equity. This includes 2 initiatives and 4 action steps. 3. Dismantle structures that perpetuate and normalize white supremacy, challenge and transform histories and structures that slow or reverse change, and value work that advances equity. This includes 5 initiatives and 5 action steps. 4. Redress harm of existing structures. This includes 4 initiatives and 5 action steps. 5. Redistribute power and resources. This includes 6 initiatives and action steps. The draft would supposedly be done by December, with time then and now to discuss openly with students and faculty about the ways that these can be improved or applauded as being a good start towards improvement. However, this was disrupted when a group named the Bryn Mawr Strike Collective emailed the community at 8:47 p.m. that same night. We, the group of students initiating the strike, have been striking for 6 consecutive days in solidarity with the Haverford BIPOC students, specifically the Black community at Haverford, and in anger at our institution's inability to fully address the demands called on in the summer of 2020 by Black students refusing further in action's open letter to the BICO community. The document shared with you states why we, a certain contingent of Bryn Mawr students, are striking and what our demands entail. It also states that the strike does not end until the administration lays out a timeline towards these goals that we can hold them accountable for. Until then, we will remain uncooperative with the order of the institution and urge you, Bryn Mawr students, faculty, and staff, to do the same. In the future, this interaction of Cassidy sending out her framework before the students' demands is seen as a raw move. The Equity and Anti-Racism Draft Framework for Action, originally drafted as a response to summer plans, would not be issued until November 3rd, just minutes before Bryn Mawr's BSLC issued their own strike demands. To strike organizers, this felt like an insult. After waiting for 4 months, the college had chosen to release a final appeasement only when they needed to. It's funny to note that this feeling of being insulted could be easily resolved had this newly formed strike collective read the last demand of the BICO letter and Cassie's response, which confirms that the work of the framework and the time they sent it was foreshadowed. They didn't send it only when they needed to. They sent it according to the promise that you, the BICO writers and supporters, agreed to. It's all about urgency and keeping promises until the timing and events can be manipulated to gain something else desired. Unlike Haverford's organizers who held a semi-known and then semi-anonymous status during the strike, the organizers for Bryn Mawr regard themselves as the core Bryn Mawr Strike Collective from the beginning. In their collectivity, they urge those hesitant about the strike to put full trust in them, and how crucial it is that their requests are believed fully and that no student go against the strike's picket line. It is shown later that their urging for trust in their collective doesn't come at the cost of upholding the responsibility of such an authoritative position. When someone a part of the strike attempted vandalism of a building, suddenly because they are not a part of the main organizer collective, the collective isn't responsible for them. Trust and power cannot be commanded to someone if they drop all responsibility in handling those close to them who disobey. Their demands read as so. Demand 1. We demand transparency and intentional student involvement on the progress of the BICO Open Letters demands. This request to action was already occurring with the 3 open forums and open student involvement with the framework in September. The document Carla provided in regards to this is public on the Bryn Mawr events page. The comment on voting power is the one that sticks out here, although the work for the framework up until this point has been crowdsourced, with the Carla document providing extensive notation to the note and comments occurring within the 4 sessions in September. Demand 2. We demand a BICO course on Blackness and white privilege as part of a college-wide requirement to be implemented in the next academic year. This demand is worded exactly like the second demand in the BICO letter, and was even answered in the framework sent minutes before these demands. The comment expanding beyond Thrive, the 360 program, and the humanities seems to be where the difference lies. There was already a comment that jabbed at the STEM departments, so the humanities comment makes sense in this context. Demand 3. We demand that the school continue to pay the students who are participating in the strike. Students should be paid for all work hours missed during the strike. Out of all these demands, this one contains the most amount of audacity. Demand 4. We demand that Bryn Mawr acknowledges the unseen labor of Black women and Black trans non-binary people on our campus. This demand has a few demands baked into it. The first and second regard both support and recognition for students and faculty in a certain group as they see fit. That's where the messiness lies. Since the framework sent by Cassidy has a couple initiatives focused both on Black students and faculty with the focus on those doing the hard work of anti-racism. If these initiatives aren't seen as fitting someone in that group's definition of recognition, then all the college's efforts are out the window. The last demand is the second on the list of audacity, seeing how, 1, the BICO letter's vision wasn't even allowed to be played out because of the writer's own betrayal of waiting and working until the end of fall to see a framework regarding their demands, and 2, the Core Strike Collective hasn't even done anything to deserve being paid of as of yet. No good fruit has been grown from their labor or suggestions, and the school hasn't put them in any bureaucratic work that could get them recognized and being paid through the school system. Demand 5. We demand an implementation of yearly faculty diversity training encompassing cultural competency and the need for social justice in their day-to-day work. This is a reiteration of Demand 4 from the BICO letter. Cassidy's framework point to opportunities from anti-racism education for academic and administrative departments. The book suggests by the organizers is not explicitly mentioned, but the first portion of the demand has already gone into fruition, seeing how the main leader of Carla is a black woman regarded for her work in anti-racism and critical race theory. I don't know who else could be seen as having a significant expertise but her. Demand 6. We demand the implementation of a reparations fund towards a yearly allocation of funds and resources to Black and Indigenous students. Although it was Haverford's response to the BICO letter that indicated that making funds only for a specific group in this manner would be wrong according to federal anti-discrimination law, it's fair to see that as the case here also. In Cassidy's response to the BICO letter's demands for funds, she mentions expanding the Dean's Emergency Fund to address students' individual needs. There are already existing programs and in-school work regarding social justice that any student can be a part of, and asking for a specific group to be accommodated for, quote, any and all financial need beyond the scope of racial justice sounds very illegal. This also isn't in alignment with the example they give of the reparations fund, which is included both here and in the BICO demands, which talks about Georgetown University students arranging a plan for a small yearly tuition increase to raise money for the descendants of the 272 Africans sold by the original founder of the school. That fund would help education and healthcare related to endeavors related to the school for those descendants. It has nothing to do with students of certain identities' general needs for books, online courses, or therapy. They also fork in the idea to support local communities, which the university can't do directly as a nonprofit. They may, however, allocate funds within an educational-based mission within the school that could impact those communities. Demand 7. We demand an increase in funding for the Enoch Cook Center 31 community funding. They don't fully elaborate on how the increase of funding to $10,000 isn't enough. Cassidy mentions both that the $10,000 fund increase would be evaluated by the end of the year to discuss its efficiency, and of giving $15,000 to the ECC in regards to planning for Black History Month, which is an event the ECC would hold. The two events listed in the demand don't elicit initially as events that would need more than $1,000 or so in catering and entertainment. Demand 8. We demand the removal of all names and monuments present at the Bryn Mawr College campus dedicated to individuals who had a history of oppressing past students, faculty, and staff who did not align with the wealthy white feminist agenda. We are particularly interested in the removal of M. Carey Thomas's name inscribed on the old library building facade and Woodrow Wilson's sign on New Gulf Road. The M. Carey Thomas situation has been a long-standing issue the college has been addressing for a few years, and it is an important one to dissect here. In September of 2017, Cassidy placed a moratorium on the use of Thomas's name within the school and established a working group to begin studying and investigating the most appropriate form of action in regards to Thomas's legacy. The established working group then took a semester to research archives and listen to hundreds of students and alumni, faculty, and staff to figure out not what to recommend, but what do we need to learn. After explaining the questions they base their learning off of, they go into the recommendations, grappling with the past, making clear avenues for people to learn about Bryn Mawr's history through orientation or other means. Their comments on the building are as follows. The college should bring to a close the use of Thomas in reference to the old library and great hall and daily business of the college. Building names carried the ideological weight of their namesakes. The renaming of the library in honor of M. Carey Thomas in 1935 memorialized alumni regard for her at the time and their identification with her accomplishments. Our careful study and contextualization of Thomas and of Bryn Mawr's history in combination with our listening to many hundreds of members of this community have led us to understand that Thomas's name on our most iconic building has power. The old library should continue to be preserved and acknowledged as a historical landmark and as an active center for teaching, learning, and celebration. The Thomas's name etched on the building should remain, and a significant plaque or other museum-quality display should be installed to annotate the history of the building and inform the public about M. Carey Thomas. The working group's decision to rename the building but keep the original name inscribed is shown to be an act of historical preservation, not to uphold and praise the past, but to remember and not repeat its grueling aspects. They show a desire to actively contextualize Thomas's attitudes while recognizing the legacy she had that cannot be puritanically overwritten. Later that summer, the Board of Trustees releases a document agreeing with the working group's findings. In early August, Bryn Mawr announces these findings and decisions publicly. There was commotion on both sides regarding the keeping of the name on the building. Some found it offensive, while some found it empowering to defy. The Equity and Inclusion Framework for the 2018-2019 school year lays out a project for the working group to decide and research how to properly tell the story of Thomas. In early October, the decision to keep the name inscribed was at its brim of disagreement as a group of 200 students lined around the building chanting, "Brick by brick, wall by wall, and Thomas's name must fall." It seems the division about the M. Carey Thomas issue is not about the college not doing anything, but not doing, quote, enough in accordance to a certain political belief of what it means to preserve and write history. The DEI framework for the 2019-2020 school year talks on giving more opportunities for researching the histories that may have been left behind, and continues discussion on ways to make old library hold reflection for the past and present projects from students in the present. The response to the BICO letter reiterates the continuing of this current work of the working group, along with the drafted anti-racist action plan Cassie sent out before this set of demands. Demand 9. We demand that Bryn Mawr and Haverford College take an active role in police and prison abolition. This is another copy and paste from the BICO Demand 8, with the only difference being further clarification about Bryn Mawr's standing with having to lawfully work with police in certain situations, which means that they recognize the reality that Bryn Mawr, beyond laws that are on a local and state level, doesn't have direct affiliation with police. Rather, the organizers want to control and have certain outside affiliates of their political standing to interfere and work with whatever process the school has currently. Demand 10. We demand that administration actively encourage students at Bryn Mawr and Haverford College to utilize transformative justice methods in conflict resolution. This demand is built off of claims of certain bias reporting, bias policing, and bad behavior happening, which cannot be fully trusted or denied in this bureaucratic setting since there's no proof offered to do such. The organizers use these claims to say the college needs some sort of democratically run authoritative system on a social and institutional level to keep people accountable, and demands an outline to do this transformative justice work. Demand 11. We demand that Bryn Mawr follow in the footsteps of our peer institutions and make partnerships with local Black social justice efforts. This is a copy and paste from Demand 13 in the BICO letter. This ask could fall under either A, the college cannot perform these requests due to their nonprofit status, or B, the college could work with some of these programs if they fall within certain educational standards to partner in some sort of fellowship manner. Demand 12. We demand that the BICO stop its violence against disabled students. This is an almost copy and paste from Haverford's 10th demand in their original set sent October 29th. C here is the same as C there, so is D, F is the same as B, and G is the same as E. This demands E is an overreach in demanding the admin to control professors' specific classroom policies, a point that's been reiterated many times by Haverford as something the admin cannot and upholds itself not to do. Faculty's freedom in classrooms is a value that's been long fought to be upheld. Demand 13. We demand that the college stop charging BIPOC international students who receive financial aid or other forms of financial assistance and undocumented students who aren't considered international students extra scholarship tax. It's nice to see a demand that hasn't been copied and pasted. We'll see how it rolls out as we continue. Demand 14 is in a similar vein, stating, we demand that winter break and summer break house costing for BIPOC international students be reduced to accommodate BIPOC international students who receive financial aid or other forms of financial assistance. Demand 15. We demand that Bryn Mawr College declare itself a sanctuary institution. Although the comment of refusal of the label sanctuary institution is hard to prove, the past two DEI frameworks list protections the school is or will begin to employ in regards to undocumented and DACA students. Demand 16 is within the same vein, reading, we demand the inclusivity of undocumented students, particularly those without DACA status and work authorizations on work payment systems. Demand 17. We demand grade protections and the implementation of student suggestions to the curriculum committee. The comment on what grade protection means here isn't elaborated. Demand 18. We demand that Bryn Mawr College respond to each of these individual above demands in the form of concrete action and change. Why they mention having Haverford's demands met to the end of their own strike is odd. Cassidy has no bureaucratic control over how President Wendy and their staff handles things. As promised in our first open letter, we are to remain uncooperative with standard Bryn Mawr procedures until our demands are met transparently with clear timelines and budgets. There was also a promise in your open letter that you didn't follow through on, or even mentioned once an opportunity to be disruptive came up. In a graphic on the Bryn Mawr strike website, the way the organizers make sense and justify their situation to strike is as so. They mention the BICO demands and how Cassidy's draft sent out on the 3rd was insufficient and ignored a lot of the demands. They mention how Haverford was striking against admin inaction and an insufficient response, which again neglects what was originally asked of the admin from the BICO letter. They then tell Cassidy, there's a lot that's new here. These have been expanded in terms of clarity from what's been asked for. Not once here or further on do the organizers go into why they couldn't bring up the clarification or the few new demands through the proper channels or procedures beyond this looming comment of, they've ignored us in the past, which doesn't seem to be built on a solid argument considering this BICO demand 14 I am constantly bringing up. I want to note that in my original investigation of Bryn Mawr strike, I counted November 3rd as the first day of the strike. Going through my research once more, it seems it was fully initiated and recognized on November 4th. I will mark the 4th as the official first day in this video, but know that some of my further investigative videos that are referenced here might be off by an extra day. With that said, let's go into what happened. On November 4th, the first official day of the strike, organizers sent out a forum for questions and participation. 337 students pledged to support the strike, and the organizers sent out a letter to faculty urging solidarity with them also. They state, "Many of the demands made over the summer have not been met, including the establishment of Africana Studies as a major, the cutting of all ties with local police, and the elimination of M. Carey Thomas's name on Old Library. Establishing a new major cannot be done overnight, and the main bulk of this work was to begin in the fall according to the response Cassidy gave to the BICO letter and the work with Carla. As also stated in the BICO letter response, Bryn Mawr has no direct ties to cut with local police, though the organizers are also talking about implicit ties, and we've already discussed the work and issue regarding M. Carey Thomas's name on the building. The letter further talks on the need for faculty to use their power in holding each other accountable and to apply pressure to the admin, and Publius is also mentioned here. The organizers state that the act of publishing his opinions showed the political department's support for its, quote, harmful content, and this proves that admin and students are trying to silence Black voices. November 5th, the second day, is only marked by more sign-up forms being sent out. November 6th, the third day, is marked by President Cassidy's first response to the demands. Demand 1. Cassidy welcomes student involvement and participation and is open to ideas on more student engagement. She will continue sending out mid- and end-semester frameworks for action and will continue giving full end-of-year reports on school activities. Demand 2. The Provost's office will support a group of faculty to make such a course and submit it to the curriculum committee to be taught next school year. She reiterates that the admin does not have authority to impose a college-wide course requirement. They will encourage such actions that the faculty can thoroughly think and decide through. Demand 3. She brings up the 20 hours of compensated lost work. Demand 4. She welcomes input on this request and is open to considering opening positions which students can occupy and get paid for this work. Demand 5. The framework sent out on November 3rd provides a timeline for this action for both staff and faculty, and the recommended chapters will be distributed by the Provost Office. Demand 6. A fund for supporting Black students has been around since 2008 and was revamped recently due to work of Black alumni for internships and other professional developments. The Provost Office developed partnerships to aid in underrepresented groups, and the expansion of the Dean's Emergency Fund is stated. Demand 7. She specifies the raising of the fund from 5 to 10K, stating that there was no reported spending exceeding 8K. At the end of the school year 2021, they would evaluate how the spending was used and see if more needs to be added. Demand 8. She mentions what's been outlined in the framework and recognizes individuals who were previously ignored, states that the Woodrow Wilson marker is not property of the college but has been petitioned to consider its removal with the hearing commencing on December 2nd. The bust and portrait handling will be investigated by the History Advisory Group and Cassie will make the final decision come May. They mentioned what I went over previously of the history regarding the handling of M. Carey Thomas's legacy. Demand 9. The school has no formal relationships with either police departments, but communication must stay open in cases of identity theft or insurance claims. She discusses wanting to understand what it means to formally implement transformative justice partnerships and suggests a meeting commencing before December 18th to begin that process. Also states that the college does not reopen cases for any employees unless new information has been brought forth. Demand 10. States that the COVID incident report form was changed due to student feedback, and how currently there is no data of overrepresented reports of violations and subjected disproportionate scrutiny. She doesn't dismiss the possibility and says that Dean Walters will meet with Black students before December 18th to learn about their experiences and that they will continue to monitor data. She re-emphasizes the need for a shared definition of transformative justice before commencing such work and states a meeting that should happen before December 18th to do such a thing. Demand 11. Needs more information before she can commit to anything, and states the nonprofit status comment again. She encourages going through the Civic Engagement Office for these ideas. Demand 12. She states the legality of certain things in regards to why certain demands cannot be supported outright, and says Dean Walters will convene with Access Services and its student groups before December 18th and will bring forward some of these suggestions to them. Demand 13. Points back to the action framework and talks about an announcement made earlier that year of another grant that could be eligible for low-income students of any status to aid in their education. Demand 14. The cost of housing and food during breaks are already subsidized. We cannot change different prices for students based on their identity. Demand 15. They state they already have accommodations akin to a sanctuary school and state to further work on these accommodations. Demand 16. States they will be able to engage in fellowships which could provide avenues for payment. Demand 17. The curriculum committee is working on it according to Cassie's knowledge. Demand 18. Done, and these comments will be further considered in the action framework to be finished by the end of the semester. She also emails a document of a freshly edited framework, which includes 9 new action items inspired by the demands sent out. Understanding the great urgency of the situation, she asks for a meeting with students, faculty, and staff to join a Zoom gathering at noon. The organizers respond declining the meeting and stating to postpone it to next week so they can have a thorough response to Cassie's response. The organizers prop themselves up by claims of the admin not doing anything or not doing things quick enough. When the admin then recognizes the urgency of the situation, responds urgently, and asks to meet quickly, suddenly urgency is unprofessional for a proper response by the organizers. It seems that not only do the organizers want the control of the social, moral, and institutional workings, but also on the definitions and standards of who gets to be urgent and who has to, quote, wait for a proper response, even though they themselves did not hold their own standard up in regards to the time they gave the admin to give a framework regarding the bycode letter. They simultaneously ask for the meeting to be recorded for those who can attend, but also for people to not attend the meeting to properly show support for BIPOC students. That same night, a sit-in was held in front of Old Library. They spend the night lamenting on the not enoughness of both the meeting that happened that day and Cassidy's response, and shame those who show a moral stance and not supporting the strike.
I'm not BIPOC, so do with this info as you want, but I think it's important to let the Russian department's response to the strike be known. Ooh, Russian department? Who's in that department? Who heard what was said today? Interesting. Anyways. A professor likened strikers to the Bolsheviks, and another professor laughed at a student who suggested that we have a more in-depth class conversation about racism in Russia. They basically said that we're the enemy by sending them the demands and essentially calling them calling for them to end classes in solidarity. That's really interesting.
There's more.
Oh, but wait, there's a little bit more. The professor compared the strike to living under the USSR. Do any of y'all know anything about history in the USSR? Because she was being told how to think. That's ridiculous. So let me piece that together. In short, the Russian department is racist. This woman did what is typical of white women: victimize herself and make racism and make the conversation the problem. Girl, the problem is you. That is gatekeeping. That is racist. That is Bryn motherfucking Mawr.
Nothing notable happens on November 7th, the fourth day. They share on their Instagram page the demands from a past protest that occurred at Bryn Mawr in 2015. On November 8th, the fifth day, the organizers meet with Dean Walters. The organizers ask in different forms the need for both knowing and assuring that the school will not punish them for their action to strike. Walters confirms this to the best of her ability. She also states the school's confusion on the alienating experience of the collective keeping anonymous, and also talks about the previous town hall initiating quickly because students seem to want to be moving quickly. She agrees to do a town hall that's controlled under the organizer's circumstances. President Cassidy sends out an email titled Continuing a Path Forward. She thanks the more than 250 people who attended the meeting, which talked about the demands of the organizers and the general work the college has been doing regarding anti-racism. She mentions the organizers choosing to decline and cites that Dean Walters will meet with them to discuss their further plans. She talks about the need for Bryn Mawr to follow on its educational purposes while recognizing the harm experiences that the strike represents. I have been hearing from many faculty, students, and staff who are conflicted. They both desire to support the strike or its underlying purpose and are committed to teaching, learning, and the other work they do at the college. I ask that we respect the very real circumstances that each individual faces and not assume value or lack of commitment in a monolithic way. Rather than being for or against, I hope we can unite under our common goal of enacting change. A meeting held by the organizers that day called this email Fear Tactic upon Fear Tactic upon Fear Tactic. The rest of the meeting discusses the logistics of how they should continue, future sit-ins and teach-ins, and other organizational processes. On November 9th, the sixth day of the strike, a sit-in in Taylor Hall occurs in the late morning that consists of designing posters and listening to music. Cassidy sends out an email reminding students to be cautious and follow social distance guidelines. The organizers have a meeting with supportive faculty, and later in the afternoon, Cassidy sends an email titled Moving Us Beyond This Moment. I hoped I would not have to write this message, but given the events of the last few days, I must. I support any student's right to protest, and I am deeply committed to the transformation of Bryn Mawr College as it aspires to be an anti-racist institution, but our community is being torn apart by a lack of cooperative action and, more seriously, by a lack of respect for one another as individuals and by actions that have no place on this campus. In my communication to the community yesterday, I urged respecting and honoring of individual rights. Whatever the important goals of the strike and the demands, the college cannot constitute shaming, harassment, and intimidation of students or faculty to achieve them. The college cannot and will not tolerate a climate of fear where, amongst other examples, students are afraid to eat in the dining halls for fear of humiliation or for being seen as a racist. The acts of intimidation that I am witnessing and that many students and faculty have described violate the core principles of the Honor Code and violate our obligation to one another as members of the community. They are also unproductive in achieving the stated goals of the strike. Students have a right to their education and should not have to endure shaming to attend classes. Faculty has a contractual obligation to offer their classes and to provide students the curriculum that was promised. It is unacceptable for faculty to be targeted for public ridicule for doing so. The path forward needs to be a mutual one, with all parts of the community coming together to share their understanding and expertise. I have operated in good faith and have proposed an ambitious plan of action. I have provided specific timelines to achieving the objectives outlined in both the summer demands and the recent demands of the strike collective. 6 days ago, I published a draft action plan that lays out specific actions the college will take to realize a more equitable and inclusive campus. 3 days ago, I responded to the set of demands issued by the strike collective on November 3rd. I have asked for community feedback and received almost none. The strike collective declined to participate in the community meeting held on Friday and has so far not shared their input, other than to say the demands have not been met. I do not for a moment think I have all the answers or that I can do this alone. However, the current approach is not working, and it is my responsibility to move us beyond this moment. I reject the suggestion that change will not occur without the pressure of the strike. This is simply wrong. I am committed to effecting real change and believe it will occur and can only occur with us working together. Instead, the fabric of the community is being torn apart, which is a tragedy given that we all support the stated goals of the strike and are prepared to concrete steps to move the institution forward in meaningful ways. This email spurs an intense reaction from the organizers and strikers. The calls for communication and a possible meeting with an assorted group of people were ignored as a spontaneous sit-in fills the night with emotional grievances and calls of the email being racist.
I would like to start with reiterating that Bryn Mawr and Haverford has dismissed the work and voices of Black ambassadors for too long. Without half of the annual movers, the NCC community and allies, diversity on this campus would not exist. Our bodies matter, our voices matter, and bottom line is, without us, Bryn Mawr is like shit. The racism we've endured has been the motivating factor to keep the strike going. A strike is the refusal to work by an organized body of employees as a form of protest in an attempt to gain concessions from their employer. I share this definition because many folks appear to be confused as to what a strike is. People have shed their white tears and voiced their complaints and have been about not being able to attend classes. To that I say, be quiet. People who look and identify as I do are dying every day. Black men are dying, Black women are dying, Black children are dying, Black girls are going missing, Black boys are being thrown in prison. Black people are dying, period. For years, society has expected us to succumb to the normalized violence against our Black bodies, and students may not be dying on this campus, but our will to be present and our mental state is. To Kimberly, and I know you are not here, but I will still say this because this is very important. Your work as a president during this time has been a mockery of activism and allyship. Your recent emails expose the racist views you hold that continue to eat away at your sense of morality and honor. You responded to the students' demands and thought that would be sufficient enough. As a privileged white woman, you should understand there's always learning to be done. You applied to be the president of Bryn Mawr College. You pride yourself on how connected you are to the student body. You hold countless events throughout the year for your personal economic benefit. I will say that last sentence again. You hold countless events throughout the year for your personal economic benefit. Where is your presence when it matters? I encourage you and those who are here now, I know that I'm speaking to Kimberly, but also those who are here, to attend and participate in a sit-in or teach-in being offered. Many faculty members and students have been doing so. You are not doing the real work that needs to be done in order to move forward. Stop expecting help to arrive at your front door with a ribbon on it. The resources and help has been offered to you. Get up and do the work. And I'll end with this. The racism I've endured here during my time at Bryn Mawr is nothing compared to how unsafe, and I put that in air quotes, how unsafe your white students and staff may feel right now. The dehumanization of students within the BICO will not be overlooked because of you, ignorant professors, and imbeciles disguised as students. that don't understand how race is used and how it works against me and people who look like me. Thank you.
The organizers released a statement on Instagram regarding the bullying. Although a claim cannot be made that the organizers didn't tell individual perpetrators in personal conversation not to partake in these actions, the entire motive of this and Haverford strike was a breeding ground for this behavior. You, the organizers, created a bedrock, a ground of resentment and anger and emotion and momentum and pressuring the student body and administration to your bidding or wanting to or asking people to do so to get people on board. To say that the people not with us are not in the moral right. You have to confront them. You have to talk to them and get them on our side because we're in the right. Us strikers and organizers are in the right. You made the ground that thus planted these people. What grows from that ground? Do you think good behavior? Do you think that the things that you hold dear will be reflected in what grows from the soil you laid out? Because clearly it did not. And I don't wonder why. I know why. Because nothing good can grow from a ground of resentment and anger and young adult angst and somewhat justified confusion about what's going on in the world. You can't sit here and say, we didn't tell anyone to do that. We didn't say to do that. We're not doing any of that. This is not reflecting us because we know how to properly hold our anger. We know how to properly hold our resentment and how to use it to the proper power. These people don't. They're supporting us, but they don't know how to do it. It's not our fault. It's not like we've laid this huge ground for this bad behavior to spawn from. Now, I know this phrase is not really accepted in a lot of circles that you guys are a part of, and you guys and this general people who probably disagree with me, but I will use it to your benefit. There are bad apples. Even if you guys made a good ground, some people would have done bad things, and if that were to happen, I would stand by your side. But this entire thing has not shown me that you've planted a good ground for people to have good behavior to grow from. It seems you monetize yourself on these very, very vulgar and visceral emotions that then bloomed people who use those emotions in ways that you wouldn't do. I cannot claim that you guys would do this if you were in this situation. So what you're saying is that or implicitly what you're saying is that we are holding our anger, our resentment for this institution correctly. We are putting it in the correct place. They did not, and that's not our responsibility. Technically, yes, their actions from you is not their responsibility, but I can certainly point out the fact that you planted this ground for them to come off of, and you wanted everyone to act as a collective, which means it has to be collective responsibility even if there's one bad apple. When two Bryn Mawr organizers are later interviewed and asked about the bullying that occurred, they first state that they don't have time to monitor people who are striking, which reflects the double standard of them wanting the admin and their own group to have oversight in all of the hiring procedures, academic decisions, social environment, or accommodation. They want that oversight empowered there with themselves and the admin, but when it comes to reflecting that demand within their own organization, they mitigate that responsibility and say it's not their fault. They then gaslight the experiences of bullying and state that it's not harassment, but confrontation of wrong beliefs these people are holding. They then go on to explain how tired they are of being called bullies or aggressive. Dean Walters attended the sit-in and was asked to come forward. She was interrogated for the fact that even though she was paying attention to the events going on, she didn't attend the teach-in on radical access that occurred earlier that day. And the questioner was wondering why, with all the emphasis on education, were the teach-ins not endorsed as a form of education. Walter emphasized that the main goal has been to address the demands of the strikers in the past BICO letter and deal with the current accreditation process going underway. They asked the teach-in a question again, and Walter stumbles in answering the question, since admitting that the emphasis Cassidy puts on education in Bryn Mawr is in regards to the mission towards a degree, which the teach-ins don't supplement towards directly, would cause emotive uproars from the crowd. Instead, the crowd then went to the usual question that is deferred when they don't want to admit defeat. So, what are you going to do about all of this? Because going through the process of working through the demands and commencing meetings about them is not enough, apparently. During their talk with Dean Walters at the sit-in, they aired their disappointment with the controlling atmosphere of the Friday meeting Cassidy had and suggested they do a meeting like Haverford did, where the organizers had control over the meeting's agenda and moderation. A student mentions the BMC professor who commented anonymously on a dissenting article discussed in the Haverford documentary. The student asked for this professor to be found out and to be held accountable for their comment.
There's also a comment, there was an OPED written by some Haverford students about that was against strikes. In the comments, there was an open actual discussion about students who do not agree with the OPED. And in that comment, a Bryn Mawr professor commented on it. And it's funny because it said BMC professor, no name, just BMC professor. And it's just like, why don't you want to explain, like, why don't you want to expose yourself? I will send you that op-ed, and I would like for the college to investigate who that professor is. And I would like that. I would personally like to see that professor be held accountable, because it doesn't make any sense how we have faculty who are belittling. I don't like the fact that we have faculty who are belittling students, who are being a little bit too aggressive, in my opinion, about their stance against the strike, and who are gaslighting students for supporting the strike.
On November 10th, the 7th day of the strike, a faculty-signed email in support of the strike is sent to the admin, and an Instagram post is made in regards of how those at-risk students can still go to class and be a part of the strike. On November 11th, the 8th day of the strike, some office hours were held. This was the day Harvard celebrated the end of their strike, so presumably there might have been some joint celebration in that. On November 12th, the 9th day, a town hall is announced to occur between the organizers and Dean Walters, Provost Tim Hart, and President Kimberly Cassidy. We're going to take a detour from the strike events and look at the newly refurbished set of demands soon to be presented at the coming town hall. It seems as though after Cassie's first response, instead of working within the conditions given and presenting new ideas through the avenues of meetings and further long bureaucratic processes, the organizers huddled away and made a new demand sheet to further get what they want immediately without any natural negotiation on their part, and to give a reason to continue the strike. Even though some of these demands are either clarifications to their demands or asking for clarification from Cassidy, which are actions that have more than one avenue in accomplishing them. Demand 1. We demand transparency and accountability in the progress of diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism at the college that includes but is not limited to quantitative and qualitative assessments. This is a deeper clarification from the first set of demands, which asks for such things as regular climate assessments, dissemination of climate assessments, systemic response to climate assessments, metrics, dissemination of metrics, and systemic response to metrics. They then spend some time criticizing the way the power structure of the admin, board, president, faculty, staff, and students are organized and ask for prioritization of diversity, equity, and inclusion, anti-racism, bylaw review and reconstruction, committee transparency, communication, and student involvement, budget and endowment transparency, consider hiring strategists, consultants, and experts on diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and accessibility to review college practices and performance reviews. Demand 2. We demand the college to adopt a holistic approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism in education and practices for the next academic year. They suggest the following measures to be implemented with a new distribution requirement, new course requirement, curriculum integration, new faculty and administrative bylaws, new faculty and administrative hiring processes, new faculty review practices, new faculty hiring committee practices, new faculty and staff and administrative education, training, and pedagogy, and continuing teach-ins. Demand 3. We demand support in meeting with the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission by February 1st, 2021 in order to secure the immediate removal of M. Carey Thomas's name inscribed on the old library building facade and the portrait that hangs in Old Library, as well as direct involvement with the progression of Woodrow Wilson's sign removal on New Gulf Road and publications for institutional memorization of such events on the college's website, in the official college archives, and special collections, and a $75,000 for independent research on critical race theory through a similar model to the Historical Advisory Group. We're again running into not the organizers saying the school isn't doing anything, but that the school isn't doing enough. That enoughness is measured by how much the school politically aligns with the organizers and completely disregards all of the work of interviews and considerations done between the working group and trustees talked about previously in regards to M. Carey Thomas. They use this demand to fork in their want for this other group that researches through a critical race theory lens, which is presumably a lens the organizers have been functioning off of during the strike. The next pages are for if the name will not be removed, which seems to bring up the same ideas, challenges, and actions the school has already been dealing with in regards to the legacy of those and things we now find abhorrent. Number 6 ignores what Cassie said about the current processes of what they're doing with the bust and portrait, and also demands another member take her place. Number 7 and 8 ignore the work the college has already done with no proper criticism beyond given that the previous work, the name is still there and we don't appreciate that, and that it's not within our framework we uphold, which is CRT in this case. Demand 4. We demand that the BICO stop its violence against disabled students and/or students with mental health concerns by investing $500,000 in wellness and health services. This demand is the same, but with the financial cut asked for and the clarification below it differing slightly from what was first asked, which includes questions for hiring, rewriting, and aiding in certain groups' health and allowing them special input into what a new wellness center could look like. Demand 5. We demand transparency on scholarship tax for international students. Because Cassie's last response mentioned a new grant that could be for low-income international students towards their scholarship tax, they demand transparency on how these taxes operate. They do mention their comment about Smith College from the last demand, but add another asking for an educational opportunity to those affected by the tax. Demand 6. We demand that Bryn Mawr College hires a full-time staff member that becomes the Associate Dean for Student Success and advising for undocumented students in the Pensby Center that will work with the staff contract for DACA and undocumented students and the peer contact for DACA and undocumented students. This demand brings into question what the proper student-to-dean ratio is. I don't think there's enough undocumented and DACA students to justify moving a half-time position to a full-time. Having a part-time dean for a small group of students for an already small private women's college is already a feat in and of itself. Demand 7. We demand for the restructuring of the current operations of the Enoch Cook 31 Center to be implemented by the 2021-2022 academic school year. This request for funds and stating that there had been more out-of-pocket spending without official proof disregards what Cassie had originally suggested. The raising of the $10,000 for this year would be reevaluated at the end of the year to then officially see if there was inadequacies or not, although this demand is asking for a complete revamp of what the ECC is, which wasn't requested in the past demand. Demand 8. This demand remains the same, but with 3 connotations. The assumption of human empathy here on the deans is another audacious statement. How can the organizers hide behind the comment of, the strike isn't personal, it's about a system, when they assume the empathy level of deans who have to both emotionally and bureaucratically evaluate requests from any student? How is that not making blanket assumptions on people's character from some loose idea of the systems that be? Demand 9. We demand that Bryn Mawr acknowledges the unseen labor of Black women and Black trans non-binary people on campus. This demand reiterates points from the previous one, but also requests a bunch of money for the strike organizers, BICO letter writers, and a scholarship fund in their honor. Demand 10. We demand that the school continue to pay the students who are participating in the strike. I don't know why this demand is still here. It sounds more like an antagonizing jab at the school's decision to not budge on the 20-hour compensation deal. Demand 11. We demand Bryn Mawr College take an active role in police and penal abolition at local, regional, and global scale. For all the organizers' call for humanizing and recognizing people's identity, they certainly don't extend this to Cassidy. Instead of going through the long process of talking to Cassidy or her crew, not at her through demands, public emails, or in speeches at sit-ins, but in the meetings she suggested in regards to clarifying this work, all they do here is list their arguments, examples, and more demands on the coming sheets and demand from this a full-hearted agreement. I cannot see a reality where they, the admin, wouldn't be demeaned for their elusive and non-communicative behavior if they acted in the same way these organizers are. Demand 12. We demand a significant reduction on the winter break and summer break housing costs for international students. They emphasize the points they did in the previous demand and give 2 options in completing this demand. Demand 13. We demand a transparent list of protections that Bryn Mawr claims they offer for undocumented students. This is probably the weirdest addition to the demand, seeing how it's clearly an asking for clarification on Cassie/the school's stance, which could have been asked for in a non-confrontational means, and they're backing down of Bryn Mawr calling itself a sanctuary institution, which was also in the past demand. I'll give a spoiler and say that all Cassie does to clarify in her response is a copy and paste the information from the school's website regarding DACA and undocumented students, an action the organizers could have done on their own. Demand 14 is also in a similar vein. The last 2 demands are similar in what we've seen before, which is the curriculum committee and the deadline for a response. November 13th marks the 10th day of the strike. The organizers spend this day hosting a town hall to communicate to President Cassidy, Dean Walters, and Provost Tim Hart. They spend the first hour giving monologues and reading through point by point the new set of demands. The last hour is spent asking Cassie questions about how she will put these demands in actions and what she will do regarding other issues. Like to Haverford's town hall, a student asks if all 3 of them will resign if the demands are not sufficiently met. Cassidy says yes, and Walters and Hart respond that they are at the will of Cassidy. The student doesn't see this gesture as them giving respect to Cassidy's position over them, but as them acting childish and asks them to state yes or no, to which they both state yes. Another student brings up her distaste at not only their handling of the demands, but how the demands are taken as the whole truth to be regarded with fully with no consideration of any other remarks.
It is incredibly frustrating on every demand to hear, oh, the committee, the committee has to meet. No, these are problems that are hurting current students that have been hurting people for decades. Why are we sending these things to every committee? It shouldn't be that hard to decide, oh, this is hurting a lot of students. Let's take it down or let's change that. I understand that there needs to be a conversation in how that's going to happen, but I think it's ridiculous to say that, oh, we have to make a committee to decide if the things that are hurting students should stay or not. I would understand if the committees were, okay, yes, we're doing it, but here's how. I think what the strike and the community really needs is to hear, yes, we can do these. We can't solve it right now. We don't have all the information, but here's the committee. Here's the list of people who are going to be on it. Here's the timeline. And I think also an important part of this is I don't know what issues are going to get sorted, and I don't know what issues you guys are just going to try to sweep under the rug and let them die in committee, because that's what it feels like every time you say, oh, the committee will handle it, oh, the committee will handle it.
And I hope we address that in our response to the demands. I appreciate your saying that.
You did not.
On November 14th, the 11th day, marks another sit-in. This one is more so on the fun side, alike to the Taylor Hall sit-in. The next day, the 12th day of the strike, marks nothing beyond some office hours. On November 15th, Cassie sends out 2 emails. One of them is communication regarding the new demands sent by the collective. She reiterates her gratitude for the work of the organizers and sends a newly refurbished framework, 11 pages longer than the original one. She agrees to doing a clearness report and reviewing faculty bylaws and hiring procedures, will add a new distribution requirement and revamp the Thrive program towards anti-racism, continues the forms of teach-ins after the strike, reiterates their current work with the M. Carey Thomas building and allows veiling or movement of current monuments while decisions are being made, goes into their work of making Bryn Mawr more physically accessible and revamping some of their therapeutic processes, providing a system that helps international students pay their scholarship tax, developing a new student success position for aiding in DACA and undocumented students, approving the $100,000 fund for the Enoch Cook 31 Center, renaming and doubling the Dean's Fund and looking into including BIPOC staff in the decision process, approval for a Creative Change Agent Fund for students enacting change, creating a fund that supports work in organizations and committees, along with adding some hearing and suggestions relating to using a transformative justice approach, attempts to give DACA and undocumented students into some sort of work payment system, and allow students to declare up to 4 classes credit or no credit for this school year. The second email is an apology from Cassidy for her perceived characterization of the organizers. The organizers spent November 17th, the 14th day of the strike, working on the response to Cassidy's framework regarding the new demands, and send them out on November 18th. The report card the organizers put together are questions regarding every detail in the commitments Cassidy put out. Most of these questions come off as discussion points that would be brought up in smaller meetings, alike to the ones Cassidy first proposed in her first response to the demands. They're not necessarily disagreements with what was brought up, but the detail. Some show the organizers' double understanding of their requests and naivety to the current undertaking of the school. Take their criticism under Demand 1, which calls out Cassidy for not explicitly talking about a certain consideration. A consideration means it is to be thought about by the other recipient and then is to their choice whether to then explicitly or implicitly mention it in their response or not. It's a communicative request built on trust that the other will consider what is asked and their answer is informed by that. There is already a faculty member who has been working with Carla who is an expert on diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and accessibility, which is probably why Cassie did not put in explicit terms the consideration of outside consultants. Despite how much money the college throws at these demands, there's probably some desire for conservation here. Take also Demand 2, where a grade C was given and a comment was made about Cassie not considering the Emily B seminar choice in their original demand. It should be noted that this demand was a choice. It was written as a either statement. Cassie chose the Thrive option possibly because it'd be easier and swifter to put into place. Nowhere is it specified that both need to be done or that a comment needs to be made about why one can be done and one cannot. These criticisms listed above could easily be clarified in a meeting setting. That tangent aside, in regards to the ECC budget, which they gave a grade C to, they honestly ask where the money for this budget is coming from. Budgets. Are the established budgets sustainable? What is the source of the money budgeted for these items? Your tuition! Your tuition! That's gonna raise exponentially over time with all these committees and other things you're asking for. Will the budgets be revisited and changed as necessary? Yeah, as people stop going to these colleges because the tuition costs too much and these weird things are impending and impeding. It was not impending, they're impeding your education. They give a grade F on a demand for reasons like Cassie not specifying why she, as the institution, won't pay the organizers or strikers, which are people striking against said institution, all work hours missed. Also a grade F for a not enough-ism in regards to deductions on housing. My comments earlier on the organizers having double standards on treating people with humanity is showing here again. Why couldn't these questions and responses been held off for a moment and be given in the multiple meetings and groups Cassidy brought up and suggested before? Why hide as a group behind a piece of paper? The college said they would protect you if parents attempted to sue. The college said they pay you 20 hours of missed work, even though no genuine strike against a place of employment would give such an offer. I have not seen sufficient proof in regards to this college that taking time to work with the admin and the forms they give you in a humane fashion would put you at risk. All that's been shown is you're truly never satisfied with what's been given to you, and it's this resentment that fuels your desire for defiance, not concerns for safety. That same day, the organizers hold 2 town halls, one for general students and another for BIPOC, to discuss the responses and Cassidy's. That technically is voluntary segregation! November 19th marks the final day of the strike. The organizers send an email out to the student body. The email includes a document titled On Normalcy, which includes essays and thoughts written by the organizers, the attitudes of showing naivety and not enoughness towards the work the college was doing in regards to anti-racism, disregarding the aid the administration had negotiating these demands, and a full, honest admittance of their attitudes towards the people in authority and the college itself. We would like to remind everyone that as a part of her response to our demands on Monday, November 16th, President Cassidy wrote that the college was committed to acting on all of our stated demands. At the town hall on Friday, November 13th, and nearly 700 people in attendance, President Cassidy, Dean Walters, and Provost Hart stated that they would resign should they fail to keep their commitment to enact real, visible change at the college. By our standards, there remain significant gaps missing from their response to our demands, the current path forward, and an inability to meet us in respectful conduct as shown in their body language, lack of preparedness, and inappropriate communications with off-campus parties. They have failed to demonstrate any real care for Black students at the college and Black lives as a whole historically. They have presently succeeded in alienating, enraging, and traumatizing us. Therefore, we expect that President Cassidy, Dean Walters, and Provost Hart will use their positions of power and responsibility of their offices to continue to move the college beyond insufficient reforms and towards the vision of abolition we envision. Abolition, for our movement, is labor championed by BIPOC folks that attempt to achieve a world in which inherently violent and exploitative institutions no longer exist by centering, acknowledging, and empowering organizers who do administrative and consulting work for the institution. Thus, our dissent remains unwavering and our strike ongoing. Trust. The Bryn Mawr strike is over, but the work is just beginning. In the first iteration of the demands, a research document titled Undercommons by Fred Moten and Stefano Harney is listed. Reading the beginning portion of the first essay gives the final dose of glue needed to see the picture of how these organizers view their institution. If you want to know what the Undercommons want, what Fred Moten and Harney want, what Black people, Indigenous people, queer and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabitate in the space of the Undercommons want, is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very systems that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down the structures that, right now, limit our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know lie outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn shit down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desire that issues from being in the break. However we make sense of that is to you. I can only hope the organizers recognize what they may be falling will to.